Hello, friends. Welcome back to our study in Psalm 84. I gave a brief introduction a couple of days ago, I think a week ago, on the psalm that we will be studying, and that's Psalm 84. And today we're going to just break it up. So if you were able to see that short, check it out. It's on our YouTube channel or on our Instagram feed, I believe. If not, look for it. Ask me. I'll be glad to send it to you. But listen to that because it's a brief introduction. And right now, what I really want to do is get into the text so that you can see Psalm 84 within its context and understand the value of it as if you were there with the people themselves singing this psalm. And then as the study goes on, this is not a preaching per se. This is simply a in-depth Bible study on the psalm and specifically on Psalm 84. You'll get to understand at least some implication it has for you. What we spoke about was their devotion, how the psalm has an element of devotional value towards the believer, especially even in their time and now for our time. There's a intense desire to be within God's dwelling place, and we're going to see that throughout these three sections in Psalm 84. For example, let's look at this. I'll write some stuff down here on my iPad so that you can see it, and excuse my writing up front. My writing is not that good, but you'll get, at least I'll abbreviate mostly everything. You'll get what I'm trying to do as I write this out for you. But let's take a look. There's three major sections between Psalm 184. This is obviously Psalm 84. Verse 1 through 4 speaks on the dwelling place. We're going to highlight that. Verse 5 through 7 speaks about a journey towards that dwelling place. And then verses 8 through 12, these are our three sections. 8 through 12 will speak on a hope. There's an ultimate hope for the people in all of this. So we get three sections here that emphasize what we'll see in each section, this word blessed. Now we know that the Hebrew word blessed, asere, is basically the meaning of joy, extreme joy. Sometimes we've been accustomed to use this word as a spiritualized word. I'm feeling blessed. I'm feeling that the Lord has blessed me in in some capacity or whatever spiritual dimension we may imply. However, the word in itself, at its core, it's basically happy, joyful. You are content. And all of these three sections will highlight why the believer is content and what they're content in. So let's look at from the beginning in verse 80, chapter 84, verses 1 through 4. Let's begin here so that we can understand at least this first section correctly. Now, I want to emphasize, as we gave you that title over here, the dwelling, there is a blessed dwelling here. Where's the word? The first time we see blessed is in verse 4. Now, what is blessed? Well, let's look at the verses that we'll see here. In verse 81, in chapter 84, verse 1, we have the dwelling place is blessed. We also have in verse 2, the courts are blessed, or there's a blessing for the people in the courts. There's also here the altars of God in verse 3. And the example that the psalmist gives here is even the sparrow finds a home and a swallow a nest for herself, and we'll understand what that means in a bit. But we see all of this, and then finally in verse 4, dwell in your house, the house of the Lord. So all of this blessedness is about a location or a specific area. In this case, they're speaking about the temple. Now, I want to make sure that we understand that, because from the very beginning, the temple or the dwelling place, the Mishkan in verse 1 that we saw, this dwelling place represents presence. This is God's, again, I'll abbreviate here. This is God's immediate presence. So, what the people have understood as they trek towards Zion is they're seeking God's presence. This is where the people in First Kings themselves, they were asking in First Kings chapter 8 verse 27, but will God indeed dwell on earth? This is a reminder then for the pilgrims that are on process, on their way towards the mountain, that God is near, God is close, and he desires to be with his people the way his people desire to be with him. When we see here now the loveliness, this word is interesting because lovely, we would think they're talking about the physical attributes of the temple. And no doubt the temple was a massive, beautiful structure that was built, especially Solomon's temple. And the people that experienced the presence of the worshipers there and God and all of the joy that surrounded that temple, obviously that was a beautiful experience for them. But most importantly, it's not the aesthetic value. This word can actually be translated as how loved. Your God's dwelling place is loved by God's people. And the answer to that, the question of why it's loved, it's because that's where the Lord is. That's where God's presence is. It's not just that the temple is beautiful. It's that God dwells with his people there. And so as a pilgrim that's on the way to the temple towards Mount Zion, they're separate. They're separated from God. They want to be in the presence of God. And the courts hyper emphasize this as well. As we've understood in our brief introduction, this is roughly the time of Nisan, the celebration of the Feast of Tabernacles, where pilgrims would come from all over and would go to Mount Zion and stay there for 7 days, and they'll celebrate there the Feast of Tabernacles. And where most of them stood was on the courts. In Psalm 64 and in Psalm 92, the psalmist says, blessed are those who dwell in your courts. And the Psalm 92, it emphasizes you make them fruitful, you plant them in your courts, and they are blessed and fruitful. These are the people that live on the courts for 7 days, which is a reminder, again, if we remember simply the tabernacle structure, we have the courts out here and the Holy of Holies in there. And although only the high priest can access here, the people are content with being in the courts of their God because it's close. It's close enough towards God. They're close enough to God, better yet. So this psalm begins to take shape of how much devotion they have for these things. They're not just the physical elements. It's not just the church value, if we would bring this into our modern day. It's not just going to the church building. It's what is there. And what we see here is the courts. And that is why the altars in verse 3 are extremely important as well, because it is at the altar that the pilgrims, that these sojourners are reminded of the sacrifice it takes for them to be near God. There had to have been a sacrifice. Blood had to have been shed for them to be able to come near to God. So the courts here host these altars of bloodshed, and it's a reminder of forgiveness of sin. So again, why are they happy? Why are they blessed? Why are they joyful? Well, they're going because God's there, and they're reminded that this God of the universe has chosen a people for himself and has made a way for them to actually be near him. And the altars are a reminder of sacrifice, allowing the people to stay near their God. This is why the example of the sparrow and the swallow, that they have their nests in the courts, it's just an example of how lucky they are, if we can use that language, that they can be there all the time celebrating with their God. And so these four verses will immediately give us this presence aspect, that they love to be in the courts of their God. The devotional value that we see in this is presented to us in these first two verses. As we look back at the word lovely, jadid, it's this glance upon beauty, and beyond aesthetics, they are looking at something. And as sojourners, they're placing their eyes on Mount Zion, and it's reminding them of the joy it is to be within their presence. So their eyes here are the physical aspect that's being captivated by God's presence. And then we see in verse 2, my soul longs for you, my heart and flesh. And then there's the voice that we get here too. All of this, soul, heart, flesh, our voice, everything is captivated by God. It's the completeness. It's a complete desire. This is not a superficial love. This is not what we considered, oh, I like it. I want to go there. I want to be there. Yeah, that's cool. It's fine. This is a supreme desire, an extreme desire of being within God's presence. One interesting note here, every time you read the Psalter, pay attention to the language that is being used and expressed throughout the entire Psalter. We have here the Lord of hosts. And I want to highlight this for you. The Lord of hosts. This is Sabaoth, the Lord of the God's army. And when you break up the word in Hebrew, Sava is the weight, the mass, the magnitude of God, the might, and then placed alongside a service in war. This is God's military service in action. Yahweh Sabaoth. This together is the God of war. And although it's not the same word, but the meaning is evident in Scripture, Yahweh Elohim, Yahweh who fights. These are synonymous in their structure. And we can see that in Exodus and in Deuteronomy, in Joshua, Nehemiah, Numbers. This Yahweh Sabaoth is the mighty warrior God. Now, when you look at the contrast that we've seen from the very beginning, lovely, and then we see a contrast here with the Lord of hosts. It's, we would expect a different language here, but instead we have a contrasting language of a warrior God, the beauty of the presence of a warrior God, the God who is king, therefore, is king over his people and dwells with his people. This is why the psalm takes on such a more profound devotional element, that the king, the God, the warrior God, is dwelling with his people. The warrior God is the one who meets with his people and calls them together for his worship. The people, therefore, love to dwell in the presence of the God of armies, if we can say it in modern language. It is important because they understand that this armies, God of armies, is mighty to save. The God of armies is mighty and powerful to save and to restore. That's why in Psalm 80 we have the claim, restore us, O God. That's Psalm 80 verse 7. We also have in that same chapter 19, restore us, O Lord of hosts, Lord of God of the armies, of the heavenly armies. And he is also powerful enough as king to instill fear in his enemies. So not only for God's people is this mighty warrior God a God of war and might and power, but at the same time he instills fear in his enemies, and his people are welcomed therefore into his presence for protection. So they enjoy his protection because he is mighty and powerful. His people are attracted to that presence where they can feel safe. It's similar to your children, right? They are safe in your house. They know dad and mom will protect them. They know that dad will never harm them. This is what it means to be before our great God, our heavenly Father, our warrior king. We are protected in his presence. We love to be there. And the people sojourning that are exiles, that have left, that have been kicked out, that are not there, they want to be back in that restored kingdom with their God. And then we see in verse 2, the living God. Here, let me do it a little bit bigger. The living God, evidence, therefore, that the singer is not preoccupied simply with the place or the location or the temple, but the one that inhabits that place, active and alive. And he's theirs. He's their living God. So the verse 4 there, for at the end of this, it's a summary of the first verses. Blessed, happy, ashere, are those who dwell in the presence of God. They enjoy his presence. They enjoy his protection. They are in a restored relationship with God. And the truest joy, therefore, is to ever praise his name. This is the desire of all God's people, to be where God is. And as we continue in this psalm, on the next segment, we're going to see that in verses 5 through 7, and then finalize it in verse 8 through 12. I hope you stay tuned.